The capacity for miscommunication and cultural misunderstandings is something which has always fascinated me. The idea of cultural diversity is a topic which is often politicized and whipped into a concoction of highly questionable ideologies. There are those who sing its praises and see cultural diversity as the key to community building, and then there are those who see it as a source of conflict rather than synergy. The older I get, the more nuance I see. And I think for anyone who has moved country or moved region or even just moved house, you will probably come across a whole range of experiences and emotions covering a very wide spectrum. Sometimes it can be so refreshing to meet somebody with a different world view. They can really give you insights into your own life, which you otherwise would not have been able to achieve. But at the same time, it can also be highly uncomfortable and might make you question things about your own life which you don't really want to address. It's kind of a bit of a balancing act. If you've been following me for a while, you will know that I love learning about foreign cultures and foreign languages, and I'm very glad to be living in Germany. I'm very happy to have been born in the UK. And even though there are not huge, vast differences between these two countries, there are a lot of very subtle cultural differences, especially when it comes to social interactions. And as many of you have told me, getting to know people or making proper friends in Germany can be challenging, especially the older we get. There is what I will call a German cultural trait, which used to drive me crazy when I first moved here. But now, having lived here for over a decade, I've definitely come to terms with it, and even, I would say, can see the utility and also the opportunity in using it to break the ice and really sort of get into a conversation with people. Now, this is not necessarily a uniquely German thing. I think every country experiences this to a certain extent, but it is something that Germany has become known for, a cultural stereotype, if you will. So what am I actually talking about? Well, what I'm talking about is the ability to complain at length. Not necessarily about everything, because there do seem to be certain things that Germans do enjoy complaining about more than others. And yes, I know, coming from a Brit, how dare I? I'm well aware that the Brits also do have a reputation for complaining. I remember when I was in Australia being called a whinging pom on more than one occasion, but I do think the two countries deal with it slightly differently, and at least for me at the beginning, it really came across as incredibly sincere, serious, and something that was not really to be joked about. And I do remember the specific moment when the switch flipped for me regarding this cultural trait. And it was during a work event in Düsseldorf. So this was a sort of networking training event, which they can be a little bit awkward. You have to sort of work the room and charm, or at least get people into conversation. And this is really the moment when I chanced upon the selective power of complaining. So as I just said, the event was in Düsseldorf, and so I had to get the train from Frankfurt to Düsseldorf, and there were a few complications with the journey, and really this is all I had to say, and the conversation just flowed very naturally on from there. Because if you didn't know, Deutsche Bahn, or German Rail, does seem to have built up a bit of a reputation as being unreliable in Germany, and especially among Germans, is really a topic which is often, the source of a huge amount of complaint. And everybody will have a story about, how they were stuck in a tunnel for 2 hours with no air conditioning in the summer. It was 40 degrees and people were passing out and having Kreislauf and having to lie down on the floor. There can be some really dramatic, highly emotional stories. And if you are struggling to sort of break the ice or to start a conversation, I certainly found that this was a great way. Although it is funny for me coming from the UK, because maybe this is just a topic that is generally a source of complaint in every country. I don't know if you know, but there seems to be a strike at least, once a month in the UK. So the question is really not, when is the train going to be coming? The question is often, is the train coming at all? Or do I need to find some sort of alternative means of transport? Früher war alles besser, or everything was better before, is also a pretty well-known phenomenon in the UK and probably in most countries, I would argue. We do have a tendency to look back and glorify the past, and this is something which I really struggled to understand for a very long time. But I recently discovered that it's actually a very well-known psychological phenomenon, and it's called fading affect bias. With time, our brains tend to filter out and numb down negative emotion, just leaving us with the rosy glow of the positive ones. And this is probably why we have sayings like, time heals all wounds. It's definitely a great reminder that however bad things seem in the current moment, given a few years, you could look back on this current time and think of it as, one of your best. And I do wonder if we will look back in 10 years' time in 2023 and think, how simple and uncomplicated life was back then without AI or Neuralink or the colonization of Mars. Now, I think there is no need to mention sports or politics. I think everybody at any bar or pub will be able to run the country a lot better than it's being run right now. But I think another huge source of complaint are jobs and work. In fact, I used to take this at face value, and it did appear to me that many people really hated their jobs. But, I've sort of come to realize that this is just another cultural norm, and complaining, a little bit like gossiping, can become quite addictive. And speaking of cultural misunderstandings or miscommunications, there is a phrase which I totally just didn't get when I first moved here, even though I understood all the words. And it was a phrase that was repeated a lot in my first job, and it was, manchmal muss man sich selbst loben. Like, sometimes you just have to praise yourself. And I took this as kind of a passive-aggressive attack from colleagues that they were not being seen or heard, or not really being appreciated enough. But I've since sort of come to realize that it's usually said more tongue-in-cheek. It usually is kind of meant as a bit of a joke, but it's also a sort of surreptitious way to blow your own trumpet, to sort of shine the spotlight on something that you think you've done well without really coming across as arrogant or conceited. I think complaining in Germany can be a little bit difficult to deal with because it really does appear, at least at face value, to be very serious and very sincere. And I think the Brits really sort of complain in more sarcastic tones and often use rather vulgar language, which can be a little more comical and more funny, at least in my experience. I have learned for myself to not take things too literally or too seriously, as more often than not, it's really just sort of lost in translation. Do I enjoy a good bitch session about Deutsche Bahn like the rest of them? Sure, why not? Although, if I'm brutally honest, I really have had more positive experiences than negative experiences traveling on the train in Germany. And actually, on that note, I was in Berlin a couple of weeks ago, and I was really thirsty. I didn't have any water with me, so I went to the onboard bistro, the restaurant carriage, and they seemed to be having issues, as they often do, because there was a massive queue. So I had to wait for at least half an hour, 40 minutes. When I finally got to ordering a bottle of water, the credit card machine was broken, and they didn't have enough change for my 20 euro note. So they just ended up giving me a bottle of water for free. How cool is that? Upping sticks and moving to a new country will inevitably involve a whole range of emotions, from joy, intrigue, frustration, and despair. The tendency to complain is not one of my favorite aspects of any culture, but I do see that it could possibly have utility, especially if the complaints lead to action and change. You could then say that complaining is an integral part of progress. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you made it to the end, congratulations. You might want to check out this video here next.